Hello my unsuspecting viewers, I'm Vdeogamer and this is a how to draw video game characters tutorial. And today, I'm going to be drawing Kyurem. I don't know how to pronounce Pokemon names apparently, so I'm just done trying. I'm just going to list all the potential pronunciations and hope one of them sticks because I'm over failing at pronunciation. But anyway, I'm going to be drawing this guy today. I'm going to be starting out drawing it like a normal drawing like I would. I'm going to sketch it out with pencil, go over it with some sketch pens, but then I'm going to color it with watercolor and gouache, which is basically watercolor except not as transparent. But without further ado, let the drawing begin. Like right now. Oh, okay. Oh, I'm gonna get going then. If you've been around my channel for any amount of time at all, you've probably realized that I don't upload videos very often, and that is because I'm going to college now, so it's not the easiest thing for me to do. But I still really enjoy doing it, don't get me wrong. Video making is actually what I'm going to school for. I'm going to school for film. Needless to say, I'm getting back into it. This first drawing is going to be pretty technical, but I've learned a couple things since then, so we'll just see how it goes. As you can tell, I'm starting out with just a basic sketch of my character. Because I'm going to go into watercolor, we really have to be careful not to go too much into the pencil. And I say that, and I am very much a pencil drawer. And what I mean by that is my marks can become pretty dark at times. But I will try to restrain myself. First, I'm getting the general shape. The pose I'm going to be using is this one right here. And I'm choosing this one over this one because although this one you can tell what the different body parts are, this one's much more dynamic, and I think that will work well with the freedom and the randomness of the watercolor. Kyurem's kind of funny because he has very, very big legs, as I am coming to find out. But he has very tiny arms. He's almost like a T-Rex of sorts, which I guess might be why he seems so intimidating. But that's what makes him cool. Notice that when I'm starting out, I'm only going for the basic shape. Don't worry about all the details just yet. I might be doing a little bit too much even now by including the claws and stuff. That personally helps me. But don't feel like in these beginning steps you have to get all of the details. Also, something that I'm going to do, and something that I do in most of my tutorials, I'm not going to follow the image exactly as it appears. I'm going to get the proportions right by checking back against this one, but I'm going to slightly change the pose as I see fit. Like for instance, I want to see more of his leg on this side so you can tell that it's not actually attached to his face as it appears in the drawing. And you can do that. Have fun with your drawings, be creative, and try different poses. Don't just stick with what you're given. If you try different poses, you'll get better than if you had just copied it as you saw it. Now currently he looks kind of weird. That's because we haven't thrown in the arms or the wings, and I think the wings are really going to help, so I'm going to get the basic shape of those in now. All in all, I'm just trying to maintain my composition so that way it kind of leads your eyes down to Kyurem's head, which is why I picked this pose. It leads you to his face, but also the way his face is curved back, sort of like this, keeps your eyes in a circle, so you're more focused on the drawing. And the other wing is going back further in the background that direction, so it's going to be much smaller. His arm is going to be around here, so I'll start that. And I kind of have his arm coming down across his leg, but I'd rather it come down a little bit beforehand, so that way you can tell there's a difference. And then the other arm is behind his head, and that'll be fine. The arms aren't really too big of a focus. One thing you want to notice about the spikes, they don't come out perfectly straight, as you might expect. They kind of curve off from the wing. Sort of like a peace sign that I just did there. These spikes are really cool because they're a little bit transparent, which we will do a lot to make those seem the way they are in our coloring stage. Real quick, we're going to finish up the proportions on the legs. A little bit more rounded back there than I made it the first time. I think this distinction here, this line is pretty important because this is actually his body and that part back there is his leg, stretching out towards that direction. Alright, so Kyurem's face is not the most complicated Pokemon face I've ever had to draw, but he does get pretty close to that. So first we're going to start out by further defining the jaw down here. It's not a perfect point like I had sketched it. That was just to help get the angle right. But it actually splits up a little bit. There are certain parts of Kyurem's ice-like features that are rounded. There's certain parts that are angular, and it seems to change at will. Kyurem doesn't appear to be perfectly symmetrical, if you catch what I'm saying. He's just got a few odd bumps and bruises, it seems like, where his ice might have been broken off. Like just the difference between this side of his face and this side. Here we have these two spikes, but here it just seems like it was chopped off. And then again here, this one doesn't seem to be as long as this one. I'm going to start needing a tiny eraser here. So I'm going to bring out my mechanical pencil. And here you are starting to see the spots where his eyes are going to end up going. These are very angular sockets, I suppose you should say. Really what's weird about it, his teeth get really close to his eyes actually. The sides of his inner face here, they're pretty narrow compared to the rest of his outer ice part. This is his actual face in here. This is just his jaw. And then his neck comes down in between it all. See, now we're getting to that point where our drawing's just not going to look right for a while, and here's why. It's because we can't quite do our shading just yet. And so the parts of Kyurem that require that 3D aspect to make it look right, it's going to seem very flat and probably much larger than it actually will end up looking. But that's okay. We just have to work through that. So that looks pretty good for Kyurem's face in terms of all the ice detail that surrounds it. Now we're going to work on the inner face. Ha, almost sounds like interface. Lol. Okay, anyway. His eyes basically start on the inner face. His line's coming down, and they angle off back towards the center. Now comparatively, his eyes are pretty beady, and they look even more sinister because of the black outline that's given to them. But we have to make sure our angles are right, because the eyes are going to be super important. Black outline coming around that way, and it actually gets thicker as it goes back up. And then on each side of Kyurem's jaw, he has 3 teeth jutting out onto his inner face from each side, completing the scary, weird demon face that is Kyurem. I like saying Kyurem better anyway, but that is besides the point. We have a couple more features on the face and then we'll be ready to move on. There are a few center crests that help unify the colors. This first spike coming out here is yellow, and it goes right across the center of his head. And then following up on that is a series of spikes finish up his sort of crest. We want to make sure these spikes on his crest back here are nice and sharp. They are not as rounded as some of his facial features were. There is one detail on the neck that we can add. It's a detail that is just intended to show the curvature of his body. And basically I'm going to just continue on through Kyurem and insert all of the detail lines that give him shape and form. This will make things a lot easier when we go to outline with our sketch pens. That way we know exactly what we want to outline. So get your lines as close to final as you can during this process. The wing is an especially tricky detail on this character, so I will give you dedicated instruction for that. Basically, the way you should think of it is like he's sort of wearing an iced vest, and this is part of the vest that goes around his chest here. So we have a little bit of a curve that comes out to make way for his arm. This vest also goes around behind his back, but it just comes around. Now, I actually haven't seen any of the most recent Pokemon movies, so I have no idea how this guy really flies. I would be curious to see that though. Just to see how his wings move, because right now I have no concept of them other than just these big, huge ice sculptures sticking out of his body. They're cool ice sculptures, but I would really like to see this guy fly. So if they have, in fact, made a movie showing this character off, point me a link to it and I will check it out. The outer ridges of Kyurem's wing are pretty sharp and solid. What's weird about this part here though is it gets rather bumpy, as if he's received a lot of trauma on that area. Now this one up here, we actually get to see a little bit of the inside there. It almost looks like there's a chunk missing for that one as opposed to this one, because if you notice there's that part there which is matched here, but you don't see this other spike before the wing tapers off. This final edge here comes up like this and then rapidly heads up to the end of the wing. Now we're going to spend a little bit of time working on the end of the wing here. It's actually a bit thicker than I made it in terms of this flat part that comes off of it. It kind of looks almost like an electric plug. Yeah, it kind of does. Even though it is thicker than I originally intended, it still gets a good bit of compression in the center there. Now if you'll notice on the source image here, where the spikes show up, they don't do a solid line behind the spike. That makes it sort of more seem like it's transparent, yet it's still got a bit of opaqueness to it. And so when we get to our outlining part, we're not going to do a final outline there, but I will color in such a way that it appears that the structure of his wing is continuing on behind it. As far as the edges of the spikes go, we do want to make sure that it is rigid, clean cut. And then if you'll notice, Kyurem's wing still isn't quite done yet. It looks kind of flat as it is right now. What we're going to do is we're going to add in some of the line work that they have going on down the center to sort of give it another edge in the middle here, coming down from this hook-like thing all the way to the end here. And that'll give it some more dimension, just even in our line work. Never underestimate the power of the line. And basically that's going to be the same procedure for the other wing, but I'm not going to explain that one as much. I'll leave you guys to figure that one out, because it's basically the same process except simpler. Okay, I am ready to basically finish up the initial drawing on Kyurem. I'm going to do his arm, his leg, and his tail. I already did the other ones on this side because there's hardly anything to them there. But here I will go through in a little bit more detail. Arms and more realistic body parts can be pretty tricky. Basically, we're gonna start off with this first part of the arm. Kyurem's little scrawny biceps. And we can almost kind of see how this is divided into two parts here. This circle gets sort of cut off by the forearm that appears here. The forearm bulges out this way. On Kyurem's hands, I guess he has two little claws coming out of either side. And now back towards this part up here. This is actually included in his arm muscle. And then down here we have the connector part to make it look more like it's part of his arm. Another line, and it's a bit hard to tell right now because I don't have any color, so my wording is very limited at the moment. But this is the continuation of the vest going around behind him. And now we're ready for the leg itself. There's actually not a whole lot of detail in the leg, thankfully. Mostly just gonna have one stroke there. And then we're gonna curve this around. They have their line coming around and staying on the side there like that, which is fine. These are the biggest claws that he has. The trick is making sure the claw sizes are all pretty similar. But I think that's pretty good. Alright, and the very last element on Kyurem is going to be his crazy, awesome looking tail. The whole tail is pretty much like, I don't know, I guess it kind of fans out into the shape that it is. With these spikes back here. And those tail spikes are very sharp at the end, so I gotta make sure that one's not longer than this one though. We are now ready to get onto one of the most interesting steps of the tutorial, and that is the outlining phase of our drawing. I like to use a set of sketch pens called Staedtler Pigment Liner, but basically these are little sketch pen markers that have varying point sizes that allow you to outline your drawing with a permanent line that doesn't bleed through your page and that dries like basically instantly. Let's see, how does it describe it? It calls it light fast, so I guess it dries at the speed of light. That is talent right there. Since it's hard for me to decide just by looking what kind of line size I want to use, I'm going to use my source image here to test a few of the markers that I have. So here's a 5.5. That looks like it might be pretty good for the outer edge. You know, I'm definitely going to want something thinner for my detail lines. So I think I might get all the way down to a... No, 0.2 is too thin. I think I have to stick with a 0.3 for my detail. Yeah. I'm starting out with my 0.5. And you can track along with me. I won't be giving a lot of detail in this step of the drawing. It's pretty self-explanatory. Basically, go over and outline all the lines of your character. By now you should have had some pretty finalized lines, so you shouldn't have to worry about too much of whether or not you're going to actually want this line in the end. But as you can tell, there is a big contrast difference between the black of my sketch pen and the pencil outline. We thought the pencil outline was good, but this is going to make it even better. It's going to make it a sort of professional quality, and it's going to allow us to go over it once all the outlining is done. and erase all the underlined pencil, cleaning up our drawing a ton and getting us ready for the watercolor. The only additional tip I would add on to this drawing is to really watch your lines. And I'm saying that also to myself because I spent a lot of time getting the subtleties of these angles just right, and I don't want to mess them up in this part of the process. Also, I don't know if you've noticed this, but Pokemon artwork especially likes to do what I'm just going to call for now a selective outlining, where they don't outline every single edge, especially on these ice structures. They only give just the hint of an outline so that way you can tell there's a bit of depth, and then they allow the shadowing and the color to sort of flesh out exactly what the shape is even further. Remember on the ice wings that we are going to leave the crystals, we're going to leave the spikes coming out like the electric plug prongs. We're going to leave those transparent, and so in order to further emphasize that, we're not going to give them any solid outlines at all. Zero. We're going to rely on the color to make them pop. That means when we're going back through with our eraser to clean things up, we have to be careful that we don't erase all the hard work that we put into our spikes. But we do have to lighten it up a bit so that way it doesn't mix with the watercolor. So on the head, I'm using my 0.5 to outline the eye sculpture parts and the thicker parts, but I'm going to be using my 0.3 to do all the interior lines, just to make them thinner and give it a noticeable contrast. And notice once again that I'm not connecting the lines. I'm going to allow my shading to fill in those lines, so to speak. And that will make it look more realistic, more ice-like. For the innermost part of the head, I'm going to make an exception on myself, and I'm going to go down to a 0.2 for these interior details. It's not going to matter so much on the eyes because they are going to be outlined with a thick black outline, but is going to matter on the teeth. By using something even tinier, I can make the teeth look even sharper. My general rule of thumb here has been that anytime there's a distinct difference, a solid difference between the objects that I'm outlining, I use my thicker outline, which is the 0.5. But anytime there's just a sort of contour to show the roundness of an object, I use my more detailed 0.3. Alright, now comes the cool part. We are going to erase all of the underlined pencil, and you're really going to start to see this drawing clean up. It already looks pretty clean, because I guess I have the iris up pretty high on my camera. But this will be the finishing touches, and also this is a good time to check and make sure your lines turned out the way you wanted them to. At this point, it's not going to be the easiest thing to necessarily alter a line, but you can definitely extend it farther than you originally drew it, if you so desire. And then we're going to fill up the black outline on his eyes, because I don't think I'll be doing any shading on that in that regard. And here is our finished outlined drawing. Ugh. Ugh. If it looks like I'm all dirty sweaty, it's because I is. I just finished playing badminton and basketball with my brothers a little bit ago. But we can fix that. And that, my friends, is the power of editing. Before we get into the final step of our drawing, which is going to be the coloring and shading process, I want to give you guys a few tips in regards to painting in general. First of all, painting is not like drawing or coloring with a colored pencil. Whereas with a pencil, it's okay to set your hand on the paper and use your palm to guide it. or just to glide your hand across the paper in general. You can't do that with paints. You have to keep your hand up whenever you're painting, and you have to be controlled. The difference with painting and pencils, again, you can erase pencil lines and you can erase most colored pencil, but it's pretty difficult to erase paint. There is a way to sort of remove it if you accidentally went a bit too far, and I will show you guys how to do that if that happens to me, which probably will, but that is just a little subtle thing. So if we're going to try to make sure that every stroke matters, that we get it right sort of the first time, and it doesn't have to be perfect, don't get me wrong. What might be good for you to do is have a test page. A test page allows you to try out your different colors, your different paints on a separate piece of paper, so that way you avoid sort of making a fatal mistake. You can sort of try things out ahead of time to see what it'll look like. And for me, that's mostly going to be in terms of color. This paper right here is not the same kind of paper that I have here. This is a sort of cheaper brand of watercolor. I can't even remember what brand it was. But I bought a bunch of it, and now I don't know what to do with it, so I just use it as test page now. But when I'm doing an actual drawing, I like to use my higher quality watercolor paper. And I'm not sure if it's the best kind out there, but it is Strathmore watercolor paper. It is cold press, which means it has a bit more texture to work with. If it's warm press, that means it's going to be a lot smoother. As you can see, I've already been trying a couple different things, figuring out what colors I want to use, what colors I don't want to use. I'm pretty sure I don't want to bring any purples into this. Maybe a few here and there, but I think I could get away with just using my blues and my darker colors. What's nice about my watercolors, although they aren't the most high quality, as you can see they come in these little cakes. That's fine for them not to be high quality because they're just mostly going to be base coat colors. So it's okay for them to be a bit more transparent, a bit more workable. But I'm going to be using the light blue for the ice, and I'm going to be using the black for the ground and for Kyurem's skin. But as we get further along into the details of everything, I'm going to have to bring in some gouache, because watercolor, as nice and workable as it might be, it is transparent. It's not completely opaque, but gouache is. Gouache can actually cover over a watercolor base without showing through. There is so much to say regarding watercolors, and I don't have time to go over it all. But I also want to mention real quick before we get started that you don't have to have a ton of different brushes to get the effect that you're wanting. This is probably the biggest brush I'm going to have. This is a round ox hair brush. It's the highest quality brush I have, along with this one. This one is a bright, and so this guy is good for details. This guy is good for filling up a larger space. This guy is a flat, as I found out, and he's a bit different from these. He's not actually as high quality. He's a synthetic brush, but it's still pretty good. And then I'm going to be using two little detail brushes. One of these is just a very tiny round, this pink one here. And then this one is a sort of messed up rigger. You can see it gives me a little bit more of a detailed point. But even then, you can't use these like pencils, and you actually have to load these up fairly often in order to get the effect that you're wanting. Also, when you're working with watercolors and such, and just any kind of paint, it's good to have a lot of paper towels with you. That way you can dry the brush if you need to get rid of the water, or that way you can dab at the surface of your drawing if you want to remove some of the paint if you make a mistake. And I'll show you guys how to do that later. You'll need a fairly large container of water. You'll have to change that out sometimes. Just if you also like to drink water at the same time as you draw, make sure you don't drink this water, because this water's gonna get pretty nasty pretty quick. But water does taste good. Before I even begin setting color down on Kyurem himself, I'm going to add some splashes of color to the background real quick. And I'm only going to be using watercolor for this because I want those background splashes to be very light, and I want them just to set sort of the color palette that I'm going to be using. Once again, use your test page to figure out exactly how you want to do that. I'm thinking maybe something wavy like that. Something that still shows the texture at the end of the stroke. As you can see, I'm just going across this whole drawing. It's very, very light, not super easy to see, and that's the point. You know, we don't want to draw a lot of attention to it. I'd like a little bit more dark blue where the background is going to start, or I guess the ground itself. This is all background work right now. And so visually, even just now, this gives us a lot of impact to the drawing, a lot more focus on Kyurem still, because my strokes come down in sort of like a V pattern and point you back to his face. You always have to be thinking about how your composition leads your viewer's eyes. And now I'm going to let that dry, and I'll come back and add my floor. I never knew watching paint dry could be this much fun. Man, I'm just kidding. I didn't really sit here and watch this dry. I actually went and got some lunch. But I'd just like to point out real quick, that is the texture that I was talking about, that watercolor can only produce. You can't get this kind of stuff with colored pencils. Again, it showed up over here a little bit. It's just this sort of rough, airy quality. It's not consistent, but that adds a lot to it. And that's something you just can't get with colored pencils or dry mediums. Now I'm going to add in the floor, which is just going to be done using my black watercolor, which is actually going to turn out to be gray. And I'm using this brush so that I can go in a more horizontal form. This will give it a more solid look than this airy part up here. I'm going to try to coat all the way across the bottom here. You're going to see me go over his toes a little bit, and that'll be okay because his skin color is basically this color anyway. And then I can use the white gouache to go back over his claws to make those stand out after the fact. I'm starting out a bit too dark, so I'm going to add some more water. It's a nice thing about watercolors. You know, it's okay if the floor appears to be a little bit rough. Wow, I'm really liking this gritty texture that I've got going on. I'm still going to try to get all the way to the edges though. Alright, before we really get into the skin colors and stuff like that, I'm going to add a shadow to the ground real quick. And I'm going to do that just by adding another layer of my black watercolor, this time a little bit more precise in where I place it. Now we're going to discuss where our lighting source is. My lighting source within the drawing is going to sort of match what they've got going on here. So that's going to be the easiest way to do it. It appears that the light is coming from above him and towards this direction. So the shadows are going to be on the opposite side of whatever body part that is. I actually made a mistake. Alright, we're going to fix this. Get your paper towel ready, and what you do is you basically grab a clean paintbrush with a little bit of water, water that area up nice and good, and then you take the paper towel and you very carefully scrape away at where you're trying to get at. Once again, it's okay if it's not perfect. The unsuspecting viewer can just assume that it's part of the texture. A brush now. Oh man! I accidentally put my paintbrush in my drinking water. So, yeah, that's sad. Anytime you want to soften the edges of a brush stroke or a texture, all you have to basically do is just add more water to it. There is a certain limit to where that will work, but generally that should help you get the more soft look. And now all of our background colors are dry. I'm going to start on Kyurem's skin first. And like I said before, that's just going to be our black watercolor. Notice I'm using a smaller detail brush, my small round. And this time I'm going to pay a lot more attention to the line work. What's nice about the sketch pen, and the reason we did it, is because not even watercolor can disrupt the line work. So I can color over the lines if I want to, and they will not get destroyed. I'm using a lot less water on this part, and that's because I want a much more controlled result, so things don't get too crazy. But I also don't want it to look like I just used a marker or something like that and did a bunch of tiny strokes, so I'm going to bring in some water at my leisure to smooth out that color. Since my painting is dry, I can rest my hand on it a little bit, but still the larger part of my hand, this side, and all my fingers are not touching the page as I'm working. This just gives a little bit more stability. And really, actually, now that I think about it, I probably should have started coloring from the left to the right instead of starting just wherever. That way my hand would be able to rest wherever I wanted without worrying about disrupting the color, but now I have to be extra careful. So just keep that in mind if you do so happen to do watercolors later. For the face, I'm actually going to use my rigger, the tiny detail brush, that I can get in closer than I would be able to otherwise. I'm actually trying to throw in a little bit of preemptive shading around the neck area and stuff like this, just to give the shading a little bit more of an organic property, to get some of the more of this texture in there before things become too serious, I guess. Up on the top part of his body, this is the area that we're going to want to be the lightest. And so preemptively we're going to leave this watercolor at its most transparent, right there. We are ready for the light blue of our ice particle sculpture things on Kyurem. This is also going to be just as simple as the last thing. For this one, we're going to try and have more color in it than we did the black, and that's because I want a more vibrant color to the ice. Sort of like this. We're going to need more water. So just reach in and grab a little bit more. And a little bit more. And we'll just actually use what we've got already. And for the ice especially, it's okay if this is not as smooth, if we get some more of that texture going in it again, because this obviously is a different element on Kyurem's body. On this area near the ice spikes, I want to be very careful not to color into them this time around. I'm using a bit darker of a blue setup here for the end of the wing, but I'm not going to get any of that paint into the spikes just yet. I want to use my paper towel to sort of brighten up some of these spots and add some more texture, particularly in the areas where I think the light will be hitting the ice most. So that's definitely up towards this area. Remember, since this is a base coat, you don't have to necessarily get all of your shading in at this stage, but I think it adds to it if you can get in just a little bit even now, for the parts where you are for sure that those are going to be darker. The ice parts here aren't quite as bright as I would like them, but we can actually wait until we get into our gouache to truly fix that and bring out the brightness of it. But we're just going to continue. We're going to finish all the light blue parts in terms of the base coat, and then I think we'll be ready to move on to gouache. Alright, the very last thing I'm going to do with watercolor, I think, is going to be the ice spikes on the end of his wings. Plug looking things. And for this, I think I might actually introduce my white watercolor. I'm going to mix it with the blue. That way we can get a lighter blue color, even more so than what we've had. So I'm going to start off with my rigger, and I'm only going to use my rigger for these. I'm going to start off with a seemingly blue outline, like that. And then I'm going to get some water. I'm going to cave it in. And the only paint I'm going to use is going to come from that blue outline. I'm going to get my white watercolor going. Activated, I guess. And I'm going to throw it in on top of the blue. We're not going to see a whole lot of difference, but it does lighten it up considerably so. I'm just mostly going to rely on this white to fill it up. Now these ones are going to be a little bit more tricky because you can see the core inside of them, and we're actually going to have a yellow that is thrown in here later. And now we are ready for the gouache. This is going to be a little bit different. As I mentioned before, my gouache paints come from tubes. And what that means is they might and probably are higher quality than my watercolors. But this also allows me to do a lot more specific mixing to get the kind of colors I want. And what I've decided to do first is work on the shading of the gray parts on Kyurem. And I'm going to be using a combination of Prussian blue, this color right here, which creates this very dark blue. Shows up like this naturally. And I'm going to be mixing it with a little bit of black to get myself a pretty good shadow. And that's going to be used on the shadows for the skin. That way I can get more of a unified color scheme and a deeper shadow, I guess, that pops and makes the drawing stand out more. Notice that by keeping the gouache very light, I can maintain most of the underlying base coat color that I had. Still get the effect that I'm looking for. Just a little note whenever you're mixing colors. Black is a super powerful color when you're dealing with any sort of opaque paint like gouache. So you don't need nearly as much black as you need of your other color. Notice I have this one little splotch here of black, but I'm only going to take a little dab of it to mix into my gouache here. Yep, that seems about right. And then definitely in the inner face area down here, I want to get a lot more of that dark Prussian blue. I had the camera off there for a while because I didn't have much else to say. But what I did was I went through and took my blue watercolor and just darkened my shading on the ice. And that's because I think the ice is great the way it is. I don't think I'm going to add any gouache to the ice in terms of making it darker. I'm definitely going to use some white gouache to give it some shine. But the very last thing we're going to do with watercolor, and then I'm serious, we're going to hang it up. I'm going to go and add in the edge of the wing that shows through the clear part of our spikes, and I'm just going to do that with a very light amount of watercolor. Okay, finally, we are ready for the gouache. Dun dun dun. We are going to take our rigger brush, our little tiny wimpy rigger brush, and we're going to do the eyes first, because that is the thing I have been waiting for. What's different about gouache in its entirety, in its thickness, is that it could possibly actually overwrite our marker line. Not that it would mix with it, but it can go over it. I think we are ready for the main crest. I guess there are 2 more little spots where this yellow gouache is going to go, and that's inside our crystals up here. Alright, and now comes what I think will probably be our final step. It's time to work with our white gouache. A fair amount of it now to bring out some really crisp highlights on the ice and on certain other details. Mostly on the ice sculpture parts. And there is our little scary ice dragon Pokemon thing. Kyurem, however you want to pronounce it. This is my finished drawing of him, and I think it turned out pretty good. If you want to see a more high quality version of this picture and some of my other how to draw video game character drawings, check out my DeviantArt. There's a link title thing at the bottom of the screen here. Right here. Anyway, you should check that out. Let me know what you think of the drawing in the comments below. And stay tuned because my next drawing is going to be a drawing of Mario saving Princess Peach from who knows what. Some perilous pit of doom, probably. And there you have it, folks. Check out my channel or my DeviantArt to see more of my drawings, and even subscribe if you feel so inclined. And I will catch you guys later. Until I do, keep on drawing, doing cool stuff, because you guys are awesome. Every single one of you.